A lot of people ask me what the fuck I've been at the last few years. Shit, I don't know. But I do know. I'm back now.
Here comes the rain and thunder now.
So obviously no one who seriously calls themselves a secularist could stand by Zionism. But there's still some of these shitheads who do. And as for the case of Pat Condell, I think I can understand why he does. You see, he pretends it's just about religion in his mind frame, but he doesn't only use the term Muslim or to, describe the people who are antagonists in his view. He often uses the term Arabs, and he often uses the term Palestinians. And I think Pat Condell's pretty obviously a fucking racist. And for any of you who are going to say shit like,
and that it's simply a crude attempt to impose a de facto blasphemy law on non-Muslims to stigmatize critics of Islamic supremacism falsely as racists and to shut them up.
Well, I'll be the first to agree that accusations of racism have been blatantly misused in an attempt to silence critics of Islamic extremism. And these accusations, of course, are completely false because Islam is not a race, it's a religion. So hating Islam on its own would not qualify somebody as a racist. So hatred of Islam is not inclusive in racism. But here's the thing, the two concepts aren't mutually exclusive either. And Pat, I know you also had this to say.
Because the Arabs, that's the Muslim Arabs for all you hair splitters out there.
But let's say somebody was complaining about gangbangers and they kept using the term blacks, blacks, blacks. But then sometime in the video, they just said, it's the gangbanging blacks for all of you hair splitters out there. Well, you'd laugh at them and you would realize that they're just trying to cover their tracks and they're really just fucking racist. Now, Pat, I will agree with you that Islamic extremism is a serious issue that has to be addressed. But your problem is not that you've associated Islamic extremism with all Muslims, but that you've associated with an ethnic group that is predominantly, but not exclusively, Islamic. And I think your attitude towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict really fucking reflects this, because time after time you call Israel the Jewish state. Obviously, there is a religious connotation there, and yet you support it. And you don't even bother trying to call the Palestinians Muslims. You refer to them as Palestinians and Arabs. I mean, you don't even try to cover your tracks by attaching some kind of religious connotation to the Palestinians to try to relativize the two positions and make it seemingly okay for a secularist to say which one's right or which one's wrong based on some kind of other criteria. So I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who's watching your videos that the reason you feel the way you do is because you just think that since the Palestinians look like these assholes who are creating all these problems with Islamic extremism in Europe, they are somehow less than you. They somehow deserve to have, their rights taken away from them. They deserve to live under illegal occupation, and they fucking deserve to have their homes bulldozed because some other group that happens just to look like you, that seems to act like you, have some kind of divine right to their land. Now, Pat, something you have to understand is that all religions have the same merit in reality, and that is zilch. Now, people can keep them to themselves all they like, but the moment that they're imposed on free society is the moment that that imposition should be treated with hostility, regardless of whatever the religion might be. That is the stance of a true secularist.
The Arabs don't hate Jews because of Israel. They hate Israel because of Jews.
Pat, that just goes to show what the fuck you know. I mean, if you occupy anyone's land and expel people from their homes because you claim to have some kind of divine right to the land, you're going to induce polarization. I mean, back before the occupation of the remaining Palestinian territory started back in 1967, the Arab countries, at least the ones surrounding Israel, were pretty secular. A woman back then wearing a hijab was probably rarer than a woman wearing a niqab is today in those countries. But when the Arabs see Zionists taking Palestinians' land and claiming a divine right to it, they see it as the Zionists provoking a religious conflict, and that polarizes them and drives many more of them towards Islamic extremism. I mean, let's say the Kurds, after having faced so much persecution, decide to leave the Kurdish highlands and establish a nation of their own in, say, southern Italy. And then from there they conquer the rest of Italy, and they give their justification for this as the Quran said that Muslims will conquer Rome. I mean, that's going to inflame both the European and the Christian worlds. And Catholics from everywhere are going to become more fundamental, more extremists, and they're going to be calling for crusades against the Muslim world. And seeing a good portion of European land taken away by Middle Eastern people would, even among secular Europeans, drive hatred towards Middle Eastern people. But just because there would be religious extremists opposed to the hypothetical Kurdish takeover of Italy wouldn't make the takeover any more justified. And it wouldn't in any way delegitimize the Italian resistance movement fighting to stop the occupation of their lands. The same goes for Palestine. And for all the people who are saying, oh, why are the Palestinians so upset? The Arabs have the rest of the Arab world. Well, if the scenario I just gave happened, the Kurds could say, why are the Italians so upset? They're Europeans, they have the rest of the European world. And this is why a lot of the Arabic world is so resentful towards the West, because they view Israel as an imposition of Europe on the Arab world. And no, it's not the kind of imposition where you're trying to extend humanist ideas to the rest of the world. It's the kind of imposition where you're taking a section of Europeans and giving a section of the Middle East to them and expelling the Middle Easterners who already live there. It's that kind of imposition. Now, I'm not for dismantling Israel because it was founded on injustice, because many countries, including the one I'm living in right now, was founded on injustices. But even if a state was founded on injustices, dismantling it might end up doing more harm than good. But the historic injustices have to be addressed, and more importantly, people have to realize that this isn't a justification for Israel to continue to expel Palestinians from their homes and continue to take their lands and build settlements in the illegally occupied territories. And until that stops, the situation with Islamic fundamentalism and resentment of the West in the Middle East is just going to get worse and worse. And that's the thing, because a lot of secularists say, where's the voice of the moderate Muslims when the extremists act up? Well, the moderate Muslims are probably thinking, where are the voice of the secularists when the Zionists expel the Palestinians from their homes because they believe they have some kind of divine right to their property? I mean, I do think moderate Muslims should be more outspoken against the extremists, but I also think that secularists should be more outspoken against the theft of Palestinian lands for religious justifications. So, Pat, just read your history books, because contrary to what a lot of people believe, the Jews and Palestinians haven't been fighting for hundreds of years. In fact, for hundreds of years, they've been living peacefully side by side. So it's not irrational Islamic Jew hatred that's driving the conflict in the Middle East. It's Zionism, which has polarized the Arab and Muslim world and driven them towards Islamic extremism and has caused great resentment of the Western world amongst them. And just to make one thing clear, saying there's a reason for something is not saying it's justified. Okay, I am a secularist. When Islamic extremists attempt to impose their beliefs on free society, I say they should be fought tooth and nail, intellectually, and if they attempt to use force, violently. And if I saw any Islamic extremist trying to push their bullshit, I would respond to them the same way I would respond to any other religious extremist trying to push their bullshit. But until the injustice driving this trend is addressed, more and more moderates are going to be pushed towards extremism. And to anyone who's going to call me an apologist for Islamic extremists because I'm against Zionism, wake the fuck up and Google the either-or fallacy. And if you're going to call me anti-Semitic for making this video is about Zionism, the idea that the Jewish people have a right to a land, not against the Jewish people or the Jewish religion as a whole. And the last excuse that I'm going to address that Zionists use is this: After what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust, they have to do whatever they can to ensure their security. And it's hard to even begin on just how fucked up this is, because the Holocaust, it was fucking horrible. Okay, it was arguably the greatest crime in all of human history. And while the suffering that the Zionists inflicted on the Palestinians may be dwarfed by the suffering that the Nazis inflicted on the Jews, no denial or even glorification of the Holocaust could do more to demean the memory of the millions who suffered and perished at the hands of the Nazi regime than to use their suffering to justify the oppression and continued suffering of another people. So to any of you pieces of shit out there who are thinking about using that excuse, just fucking consider that. That's all I have to say. Peace out.
My late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians.
I disappeared, don't wonder how.